And we're back. It's yet time for another edition. Welcome to this edition of Politics by Jake. PB&J, nope, not that peanut butter and jelly stuff. The real PB&J, Politics by Jake. And this is our edition. The show is going to be airing on the 20th of May, 2024 at 7 a.m. We try to bring you 2 shows a week. We have a show on Mondays at 7 a.m. We have a show on Fridays at 7 a.m. And this is the one for Monday, so welcome. And this is your reporter, Jake, speaking to you from downtown Loma Linda, California, great place, the great state of California, sunny California, Inland Empire. And once again, I'm bringing you your twice weekly, sometimes twice weekly, at least once weekly, summary and overview of things political, geopolitical, domestic and international. And as usual, one of the things that we do when we talk to you is we want to talk to you and give you, the listener, things that you can do to influence the situation. Because this is representative democracy, and this is where things get done with the individual. So that's what we're pointed to here at Politics by Jake, no matter who you are, no matter where you are in the world, to give direction to political affairs in the world and the world historical process. Because what we're looking at is a prolonged period of crisis, and God knows we've been in this for a long time. In the United States, it's been definitely going on since the ascension of Saint Ronnie. That's right. The actor Ronald Reagan to the presidency in the Pandora's box of reactionary and fascist elements that joyfully came crawling out to fly around in the world, just like the demons and the gremlins coming out of Pandora's box to afflict it. And it is afflicted, and as a result of that, we have a world that is increasingly global, and you have these fascist and reactionary elements that are plainly in existence now, and they have even a House media organ. And that organ is, no, it's not the Washington Post, but it is the New York Times. So without further ado, let's get into today's material. So one of the things I want to talk about is this food aid relief in Gaza. And, you know, this is not a perfect situation. I'll have some comments to make about that. Well, I'll make the comment now. I talk about a 2-state solution for the situation there, but I don't want to say I speak out of both sides of my mouth on that, but that's not the solution that needs to happen. Israel, I've talked about this before, we here at Politics by Jake are of the opinion that Israel has failed. The Palestinian Liberation Organization has certainly failed, and Hamas did certainly failed. Don't let me get into that. The Gulf States Cooperation Council that was established in the 1980s, really to keep Iran during the Iraq-Iranian War. There was a concern that the Iranians were going to just flood the Gulf states and create a hegemony there and a caliphate. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. But they're not helping either. Nobody's helping. This is the joke, the sick joke, the sad, cruel joke about the Palestinian people. They are hostages in their own land, and the people who talk about helping them are not helping them. The students in the United States who in their naivete and their gullibility are talking about helping them. What are they talking about? They want the universities to divest themselves of certain items in their portfolios. This is not going to help a starving people. Food is going to help a starving people. Medicine is going to help a starving people. So basically, before moving on, the thing that I wanted to wrap up about that particular thought was that, again, Hamas is, they're a great danger to Israel. They're a great danger to the Palestinian people. They're holding the Palestinian people hostage. Israel is so turned about in its head against the Palestinian people that it wants to basically exterminate them. In essentially, arguably, Netanyahu and Smotrich and Gavir and those others are potentially, they ought to have summonses issued against them for accusations and allegations about war crimes. That's not going to work. The Gulf states aren't going to do anything. Iran, it uses Palestine as a proxy. It uses it as a talking point. That's not going to work. None of that stuff's going to work. If you really, and I don't think a two-state solution is going to work, even though the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is a more moderate organization than Hamas, is still there. I'm not sure. I've heard good things said about Abu Abbas, but I don't like that. What really needs to happen, and once again, this is me talking out of both sides of my mouth on this, is the United States, the indispensable nation, it really is, needs to step in if this is going to really be resolved. I just don't think it's going to be resolved by a two-state solution, because you're going to have the same actors in place, including Hamas. They just are not going to quit. They're the loyal opposition. They're implacable. They won't do it. That's why the Israelis, if truth be known, think that they need to go ahead and do this war of extermination, because they've gone out of their mind. They've lost their perspective. They don't see any other way to do it. And you can understand it from a certain standpoint. Like I always say, if Mexico was lobbing missiles at us over the border, we would have invaded Mexico a long time ago. We wouldn't have anything to do with them like Israel has done in order to try to make there be a rapprochement, try to live peacefully with them. There wouldn't be anything like that. We would invade. And so that's what the Israelis have done. But, that's not going to work out, because genocide's not a good thing. I mean, that's not something that you want to do. And, there are war crimes being committed there now. So the United States really has to step in and make Gaza a protectorate, so that, for example, food aid doesn't get co-opted by Hamas. And when people complain about this, and they complain about Biden, and they say, and I agree with them in a certain way to this particular extent, that the food aid is going to be co-opted by Hamas, I agree. I think that's going to happen, because Hamas rules by fear, and they're going to take it for their own means. They're going to take it. They're going to store it. MREs, they store and they keep for a long time. They can put them down in their tunnels, and they can keep them there, and they can continue their resistance, because that's what they want to do. And they don't care about the Palestinian people starving. They don't care about that. And even a two-state solution, that's going to happen. Even if Hamas is disbanded, in my opinion, the leaders of Hamas, the agents of Hamas will infiltrate the Palestinian Liberation Organization. You will have the very same thing happening. The United States, so while people talk about that, what really needs to happen is, and I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm just saying, the United States needs to step in and make that area a protectorate and administer it, so that those situations which are holding the Palestinian people hostage can be broken. And now let's pause for a brief commercial message. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting, and I'm back again to talk to you about one of these little wrinkles that can cause a lot of problems and a lot of happiness for people who actually want to own a business, or who have just started a business, or who have been operating a business now for some time. It doesn't really matter. My guess is that you wanted asset protection. That's one of the reasons for starting a business. You wanted to grow wealth, and you wanted to protect the wealth that you created. And you thought that a limited liability company or a corporation would be the way to do that. But did you know that just creating a corporation or a limited liability company does not guarantee that at all? Do you want to know if there's any way to fix that? Go to www.jakelaw.me, that's JAKELAW.me, and watch my video where I talk about this very important thing, and then set up a time where we can have a phone conference, or call me directly now at 573-454-1168. That's 573-454-1168. Call now. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. So anyway, and we're going to come back to that. But so in other words, according to United States Central Command, and I'm kind of reading from a couple of articles here. One is from United States Central Command, and another one I'm going to segue into is from the New York Times. According to United States Central Command, as of May 16th, trucks carrying humanitarian assistance began moving ashore via a temporary pier in Gaza. And Central Command states that no U.S. troops were used. There are no U.S. troops on shore. This is an ongoing multinational effort where it's mostly the United States. But, I'm fine with that. A multinational effort. I don't care if other people are in there, but obviously the United States is the one that's giving out 50% of the total food relief that is given out in the world. So they're giving out, really quite a big part of that. But multinational, certainly fine. To deliver additional aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza via a maritime corridor that is entirely humanitarian in nature and will involve aid commodities donated by a number of countries and humanitarian organizations. And apparently the use of the pier is intended to supplement but not replace the existing aid deliveries over land that are going on now. Now here we are in this New York Times article. The United Nations is supposedly overseeing this, indicates that the land-based deliveries have risen slightly in recent weeks, but still fall far short of the vast need in the enclave. Dozens of Gazans have died from causes related to malnutrition and dehydration in the United States. The United Nations World Program has said that half of the Gazan population of 2.2 million is starving. This is terrible stuff. The article goes on to indicate that several countries are doing this. There are several relief organizations. There's one called the World Central Kitchen. And then there's another one, which is a Spanish nonprofit called Open Arms. So the way this is going to work, there's a pier, but there's also a floating platform that the United States is building right now. And this platform is interesting because it is actually 2 miles off the coast. The pier does not extend, they're not building a pier 2 miles all the way out into the sea. There's a floating platform out there, and the way this works is that the ships that are carrying the aid, first they offload their cargo there, and then the smaller army vessels known as, they have a couple. One is known as an LCS. The LCS stands for Landing Craft Utility, and the other kind of vehicle is called an LSV, which stands for Logistics Support Vehicles, Army names. And they transport the aid in batches from that floating platform to the pier. And so the floating platform is being built. That is 2 miles out at sea. And so these landing craft transport these things to the pier. And what happens is there's a causeway. You've heard me talk about the pier, the platform, and the causeway. From the pier to the shore, and the trucks drop the aid there, or rather the aid is dropped there, and then other trucks pick them up and off they go to the Gaza Strip, and then other trucks drop their load, they go back along the causeway to the pier, and they pick up more, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So that's the situation with that. Here's the thing. We have this prospective meeting happening with regard to the Palestinian situation. And one of the problems is, and the United States is doing this, this is not the first time this has happened. This typically happens in some of these benighted African nations where warlords essentially control everything. And the United States and other organizations try to get relief in there. And it's just all taken by the warlords, and it never gets distributed to the people. There's a solution to this, but it's not being done. And that's something that we might want to talk about in the future. But I want to talk to you about what's happening. This is what's typically happening. What I just described happening in other starving nations is happening here. Hamas has been taking the food. They've been taking the food. They've not been distributing it to the people, or they've been cruelly extracting money, what little money and what little assets the Gazans have. I mean, these people are hostages. There's just no other way to describe it. It's an abominable situation. And in order to get what little food they have, and half the population is starving. So 2.2 million total population. That's like 1.05 million people. And that's a lot of people. And the Palestinians, like I say, they've always been this way. They've been this way throughout history. This is actually nothing new. When they were the Philistines, they were this way. Their position is that they would rather that their own people die. than have food given to them by the United States or any of these other multinational countries. And of course, that's why the pier and the causeway and the bridge are so important, because it's easier to control who gets the food that way. I think there's still going to be some problems as far as keeping these dedicated Hamas terrorists from obtaining the food. I don't exactly know how that's going to work. I'll look into that and I'll report back. But, they posture, they pose. None of this stuff is helpful. I also mentioned that the Palestinians are just motivated by sheer hatred. This hatred makes it almost impossible to negotiate with them. And I'm going to give you an example. I mean, Hamas talks about how it wants to drive Israel into the sea. They're always like this. You can't negotiate with people because they don't accept Israel's right to exist. And they can agree to anything they want, but Israel must leave the lands. In fact, they must be driven into the sea. This isn't going to happen. This is just a real moral wilderness. I mean, look, Hamas uses the tunnels. They bring in a lot of munition. They bring in a lot of ordnance. They have some rockets that they can shoot off, and the rockets will maybe hit a house, maybe kill a person or two. This is terrible. There's no doubt about this. But there's no way that Hamas could wipe Israel off the face of the earth. There's just completely no way. It's completely ridiculous. And in the interim, the international aid agencies have gone native. It's a moral wilderness. There's no food, there's no water, there's no medicine, there's no aid, there's a total blockade. You have Hamas talking about denying its own people the food. I mean, this is a moral wilderness. Hamas is fantastically weak. But like I said, they could launch a rocket, hit somebody's house, blow up a car, kill a person or two. There's just no way that that's going to happen. But that's what they insist upon. And they whip up their people into this blind hatred, and it's not happening. It's just not happening. And now let's pause for a brief commercial message. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting, and have you ever tried to get a business credit line? If you did, what's one of the unpleasant things that you found out? You found out that the only way that you can get business credit is if you personally guarantee each and every single loan, each and every single commercial credit line. Now, let me ask you this question. How did that make you feel? If you're like me, I would feel like they were giving with one hand and taking away with the other. If this bothers you, I encourage you to go to my website, www.jake.052024, where I talk about this and several other important products and services that can benefit really almost all people listening to the sound of my voice. Call me at 573-454-1168 so we can talk about this, get mad about it together, and see if there isn't some sort of solution. That's www.jakelaw.me. That's JAKELAW.me, M-E. That's www.jakelaw.me, and the phone number is 573-454-1168. And now let's get back to Politics by Jake. He's talking about some very interesting things here, and you'll want to stay tuned. So without further ado, back to Jake. Now, about these youth protesters who, and I mean, I know youthful, people, and I talked to them, for example, about TikTok, and they see no problem with using TikTok. So let's just talk about that. Let's talk about national treasures. Let's talk about China. There's been news lately about the Chinese economy, which has, definitely caught a cold, and that is not good for anybody. But China, mainland China, not a great place. TikTok, let's take TikTok, for example. TikTok, the younger generation, like I said, innate goodness, innate sensibilities, morality, innate gullibility. They have a devil-may-care, joie de vivre attitude, and they don't understand these 170 million users. They're putting their entire lives in the hands of basically what are called the butchers of Beijing. And of course, they don't understand in their youth. They're longing for unity, and who, after all, doesn't long for that? Which they see as so easy. It's this, why can't we just all get along statement that made Rodney King a kind of an icon back in the 90s when there were the riots. But it's not that easy. They want to believe it is. They don't want to hear that way that mainland China has gotten up to speed in the modern world with its tech and its military, that they've stolen vast quantities of tech and science from the West, especially from the United States, but from the West. And there's this show, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's American Dad, and in it, an episode of a few years back, they have this little vignette within the show, and there's this Chinese spy, mainland Chinese spy, and he's trying to steal things, for his country. And he's portrayed as a doofus and a clown. He's wearing a bad wig, for example. And it's fun to laugh, right? But this is no joke. This is how they did a great deal of what they did. And now best estimates say that they will be ready to attack Taiwan within 5 years. And why? Well, because she is a dictator. He's a de facto emperor. The weak parliament of mainland China has voted him president for life, and that's basically a dictator. You're a dictator. When your parliament does that, you're in. Putin is the same, by the way. He has to run for elections every so often, but the elections in Russia are and always have been a sham. And he's, getting back to Xi, he's what's called an irredentist. IRRIDENTIST. It's like dentist with IRRI in front of it. Irredentist. And that means that he wants land. He wants, he wants the South China Sea, for example, which, honestly, if you were talking geographically about that, it should be called the Philippine Sea. It's much more theirs than it is China's. And of course, he wants Taiwan back also. That's the island of Formosa. And this is what an irredentist is. And honestly, he has designs on land that currently belongs to Russia. And we'll talk about that another time. But he does. Irredentist is defined as one state's desire to annex the territory of another state. And Putin is the same with this. He is a revanchist. And revanchist, that's a French word, revenge. Revanche. Pardon me, all you guys who speak French, where I butchered that. Revanche is a French word. It means revenge. And he wants the lands of the old Soviet Union back. But really, I would go further and say that he wants what Stalin wanted. He wants what Peter the Great achieved. Although, it has to be said, Peter the Great achieved this basically as a tourist. He wants to go to Paris. And he will not stop if he has not stopped in Ukraine. He won't stop. It's his nature. He's proved it since 1999 when he was installed. One of the first things he did was went ahead and almost immediately attacked Chechnya. And, it's true, when he was prime minister, he was also involved in that. The Chechen War didn't begin and end when he came to power. It was kind of going on. And I have to laugh, because history in the hands of the wrong people can be tilted. For example, one source says, and I'm quoting, "The chaos in Chechnya made many Russians fear for their safety. Even moderates began to see Chechnya as nothing more than a land run on crime. The Russian government agreed, believing that allowing an independent Chechnya was a danger to Russia." Now, this is ridiculous. I mean, come on. Considering that Russia is a country scoured and blanketed by corruption and greed, it is run by criminals who are so successful that they rose to the level of oligarchy, and Russia is run by these criminals. And honestly, Putin is the chief criminal. He's an oligarch too. And they all made their money basically through criminal methods, or methods that would be considered criminal. So anyway, getting back to the mainland Chinese, and my comment on the butchers of Beijing. Of course, the butchers of Beijing, that comes from the democracy demonstration. Remember the one where they built a Statue of Liberty, and some of the people tried blocking the tanks, and the mainland Chinese brought the army out, and they said, "Oh, nothing to see here, people, move on," but they massacred a bunch of people. The mainland Chinese are at this very moment, and have been for a while, in Turkestan. They've been there for a while. It's called the Xinjiang province. And these butchers, they're carrying out genocide against the Uyghurs. And the Uyghurs, of course, are a Muslim sect. And there are various sources, the mainland Chinese, they deny this, but there are various sources that comment on this. Several countries, like the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and the Netherlands, they have all accused China of committing genocide, which is defined by international convention as the intent to destroy and hold apart a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. That, by the way, is what Putin is doing in Ukraine. That's right. The declarations follow reports that, as well as interning Uyghurs in camps, China has been forcibly sterilizing Uyghur women to suppress the population, separating children from families. Does that sound familiar? At our southern border. Thank you, Donald Trump. And stop him and jail him, put him in prison before he can do it again or get back in the presidency. And attempting to break the cultural traditions of the group. The United States, the Secretary of State, who's Anthony Blinken, has said that China is committing genocide and crimes against humanity. The United Kingdom Parliament declared in April 2021 that China was committing a genocide in Xinjiang. A UN Human Rights Group committee in 2018 said that it had credible reports that China was holding up to 1 million people in counter-extremism centers in Xinjiang. The Australian Strategic Policy. So the reason I'm doing this is because you see this is just not an arbitrary statement that's going on. And the youth don't seem concerned about this. They don't understand this. They do TikTok and they think that's great. All right, getting back to this. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute found evidence in 2020 of more than 380 re-education camps in Xinjiang. And moreover, they said that it was an increase of 40% on previous estimates. Analyses of data contained in latest police documents called the Xinjiang Police Files showed that almost 23,000 residents, or more than 12% of the adult population of one particular county, were in a camp or a prison in the years 2017 and 2018. And if this was applied to Xinjiang as a whole, the figures would mean that the detention of more than 1.2 million Uyghur and other Turkic minority adults was going on. The United Kingdom Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said the files contained shocking details of China's human rights violations. But back to TikTok, okay? Circling back around. Supposedly, the mainland Chinese, this isn't, we have to take it with a grain of salt. It's kind of a thing that governments like the Chi-Coms put out. Chi-Coms, Chinese communists. They say they have this mysterious algorithm that makes TikTok special and unique. And all I have to say is, and this is important, if the Russians and the Chinese think they've got a monopoly on this mythical algorithm or logarithm, rest assured that they do not. It's just like the propaganda about the hypersonic weapons. The United States has had hypersonic weapons since the late 1940s. People don't know that that's the case. We definitely have them now. We definitely have lasers now, for example, or, basically particle beam type weapons. And we definitely have lasers now. And I would not also say that particle beam weapons aren't being developed either. But this has to be thought. Putin and Xi are two dictators. They're cut from the same cloth. There can be no appeasement. There can be no devil-may-care. There can be no rapprochement. It has to be with eyes open. So, in other words, TikTok, in my opinion, has to be brought into the defense sector. It has to be brought into the public sector. And the public sector, by the way, is in World War II, for example, there was something called the War Production Board. There was the Defense Production Act. That was in 1950, actually. There was the War Finance Corporation Act. And the reason for this is because, and there's a necessity here. And there are certain things, I believe that there should be a public sector. I've talked about this before. I believe, this is my idea of socialism. There should be certain companies, certain things that need to be nationalized because they're just too important. TikTok is one of those, for example. Twitter X is another. Starlink is another. And when you have a situation where you have companies that are either too slow or too greedy or too short-sighted in order to do the things that need to be done in order to protect the company, in order to benefit the country, in order to make a more perfect union, then the government has to step in. And I'm perfectly okay with that. And one of the aspects of that is the Defense Production Act, which is another one of these things that basically allocates monies to things that need to be produced for the government in time of war. But this is more expansive than that. It contemplates a public sector, and I'm for it. And the problem is that TikTok has to be brought under the control of the American government because it's owned and run by the mainland Chinese. And they're getting all the data, and that's what China does. China, unfortunately, has chosen to use espionage. And some people, I listened to some guy in the Council on Foreign Relations talk about the difference between espionage and what the mainland Chinese are doing. And he seemed to think that the theft that was going on was something over and above espionage. And he decried it, and he kind of poo-pooed it. He kind of had an elitist attitude, but I mean, that's CFR. That's what those guys are. But the fact of the matter is that they've done that, and that's how they have gotten to the point that they have gotten to. And TikTok is an open invitation to the mainland Chinese, as it stands now, to just go ahead and get data and information on 170 million people. And it should not be that way. Expanding this and moving away from China for a minute, Starlink, for example, it's a great product. It's a great idea. But Elon Musk received billions of dollars of government financing in order to make this. And now he thinks it's his. And I think it's too important. He's giving it to the Russians. They're using it against Ukraine. It's definitely not in the United States' interests to have Russia having this, and it just needs to be taken away from him. Pay him. He's already one of the richest men in the world. Pay him for it, buy it, and make it a part of the public sector. This is the kind of socialism that I'm totally okay with. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, I'm Jake with Twain Consulting for my great product, Get It in Writing. Did you know that the Wall Street Journal, Entrepreneur, Inc., all prominent business periodicals say that 80% or more of all businesses are operating without the proper stable of business forms, and that there are 10 absolutely positively essential business forms that businesses should have, but that they don't have? As a business owner, do you want to avoid growing pains in your business? Do you want to minimize client confusion, missed opportunities, bad business dealings, lawsuits? Well, that is what Get in Writing is designed to do. This program is designed to keep you out of trouble, streamline your business, and make you more profitable. If you were to go out and buy all these forms individually, you could wind up spending more than $25,000. $25,000! Amazing! But if you take advantage of this opportunity, you will spend far, far less than even $1,000. Go to my website now, www.jakelaw.me, or call me now at 573-454-1168. Call now! Save now! And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. So, I promised to talk about, we're going to talk about these things a lot. When you hear me talk about something once, not the last time I'm going to talk about it. But one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit more about was the Muslim Brotherhood. And you talk about the caliphate, and the caliphate is everything. Caliphate, C-A-L-I-P-H-A-T-E. And he was actually, his name was, until 1921, he was called Mustafa Kemal Pasha. And he was a Turkish field marshal, a revolutionary statesman, author, and founding father of the Republic in Turkey. And he was serving as his first president from 1923 until his death in 1938. But he is hailed to a very great extent as a nation builder. There's a lot of people who really have a lot of respect for him, and he really created, to a very great extent, first of all, completely got rid of the caliphate, so that's no more. And he engaged in nation building, bringing the Turkic Empire, or Turkey, into the 20th century with all of the progressiveness, to the extent that you're dealing with the Muslims. that implies. And so, as I say, his advent, that was an end to the caliphate, what I've just described. And the caliphate was basically, without a Turk, it was a dead duck. And just a few years after that, the extinction of the caliphate, we have, it's in 1927, we have the founding of the Muslim Brotherhood, with the idea that their role is to preserve this notion of a centralized political authority. They want to revive this, and they want to revive the caliphate. And this is a large empire that they want. It's anti-Western. It's obscurantist, which means it's backwards. It rejects modernity, of course. It's also authoritarian. It's violent, and it has been violent over the years, right up to basically now. And these are the guys who were behind the attempted assassination of President Nasser. These are the guys who, they didn't do this, I don't think, but the fingerprints of their doctrines are all over the assassination of President Sadat. They are totally behind, they're the brain trust or the power behind the throne. This is going back to, 2012. But just to give you an idea of Mohamed Morsi. And Mohamed Morsi was the president of Egypt. So there's just a little bit more about them. And we'll talk more about them in the future. And now let's pause for a brief commercial message. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting, and I'm back. And what I want to talk to you about now is something I call virtual invisibility. No, not literal comic book type invisibility. What I am talking about is a practical invisibility, a kind of invisibility where you cannot be seen, where your personal transactions are shielded, where your business affairs are hidden from prying eyes, where a purchase of certain items is far less likely to be able to be found out by persons who have an intent to do you and your loved ones harm, the kind that results in the preservation and the protection of your personal assets, your business assets, all for your benefit and the benefit of your loved ones, the ones you are doing all this for in the first place. That's virtual invisibility. Crazy, you say? No, this exists. It's a thing. Want to know more? Contact me either at my website, www.jakelaw.me, or call me direct at 573-454-1168. Do it now. Become invisible now. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. So, all right, apparently we have this situation with Judge Alito and the flying of the upside-down United States flag just 11 days after the January 6th riot, and I want to do a little segment on that. Now, one of the problems and concerns with Alito, of course, before we get into what recently happened, is Alito is the one who delivered the opinion of the court on Dobbs v. Jackson. And Dobbs v. Jackson is the 2022 case that basically wiped out 50 years of abortion rights. And he talks about, and this is how you know, by the way, that this is a reactionary court. By the way, we've talked about what a reactionary is, and one of the things he does in his analysis that is really kind of a disturbing tip-off is that he goes back to the common law principle in which abortion is a crime after what is called, it's an old common law concept. It's called the quickening. It almost sounds like a horror movie or something like that, the case, what Alito's talking here, he describes it, it's the way he describes it, it's the first felt movement of the fetus in the womb. And I'm quoting from a case that it usually, according to the case, occurs during the 16th and 18th week of pregnancy, according to Dobbs v. Jackson, quoting this earlier case. And this is in the days of Blackstone, which was the 1800s, Koch, and another guy named Hale, Hale. These are old, eminent common law authorities. But this is all old law. The concept is old. And this even goes back even further. Alito talks about a 13th century treatise explaining that if a person has struck a pregnant woman or has given her poison, whereby he has caused an abortion, if the fetus be already formed and animated, and particularly if it be animated, he commits homicide. And this is from the 13th century. That's the 1200s, folks. That's the 1200s. And he goes and he talks about, I just want to give you an idea, because this is abominable that we allow justices to render opinions like this based on 13th century law and 17th century law. That's the 1600s. There's a treatise by Sir Edward Coke. He was a famous jurist in the history. Basically, all law students learn about him, and he basically, he states the same thing. And the quote is, the abortion of a quick child was murder if the child be born alive in a great misprision, and it's spelled Prision, if the child dieth in her body, and that's 1644, folks. That's what this guy is doing. He's going back to the law of 1644, and then he talks about others. He talks about Hale, Hale, that's another common law jurist, that's 1736, and he talks about Blackstone, that's 1755, and I could go on. This gets back to what I talk about. These justices are either being reactionary, and if you have an interest in that, if you have something that's settled law and it's been around for a long time, there's no extraordinary or significant reason to change it. If you change it, that means you are going backwards, and that's reactionary. So going back to the time, for example, carrying on with this, when women couldn't vote, you change the law on suffrage and you say, oh, okay, now women can't vote. That's reactionary. If you want to go back, for example, to the 1860s and before the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War amendments, the 12th, 13th, and 14th Amendments, and you want to say, well, we're going to have slaves again. We're just going to do that. That's reactionary. That's going backwards. That's the baseline concept of a reactionary. And when you look at whether they're progressive or not, are they following the Ninth Amendment? In the amendment, this is just an incredible amendment. The Constitution just blows me away, how the founding fathers could come up with stuff like this, so early. It's just some of the things amazing. The Ninth Amendment is just an incredible amendment, incredible progressive document. Boggles my mind how the founding fathers could say these things. They have a Ninth Amendment which basically states that there may be other and further rights that don't exist at the present time. And if the time comes that those rights are discovered, they are reserved for the people. And of course, the idea of chattel slavery is such right, that people are not property. A person is not a furnishing. They're not a kitchen table. They're not a pot or a pan. They're a person, no matter what the color of their skin. It's a person. It is an example of a right which was not recognized by the Constitution. And the horror of this is the kind of reasoning that Alito uses in Dobbs v. Jackson. It's that very kind of reasoning. Go read the case if you want. If not, trust me, I've read it, and this is what it says, and this is the easy understanding to be drawn from it. So these are reserved to the people under the Ninth Amendment, according to the Ninth Amendment. And the Ninth Amendment basically says, and I'm quoting here, the enumeration in the Constitution, I'm quoting, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights, because you have judges and justices who are originalists. Now I'm not quoting. They're called originalists. They're called textualists. And they're called originalists, and these are basically the same thing. I've talked about this before. We'll talk about it again, but I'm just mentioning it in passing now. There are those who say, well, if it's not in the original Constitution, boom, it's not a right. The Ninth Amendment obviously rejects that because the text says that the enumeration, now I'm quoting again, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And this is how you know it's a progressive government. When people say, oh, it's written in the Constitution, not written in the Constitution. No, it's a progressive government. Ninth Amendment, preamble, more perfect union. So in other words, the union in 1776 might have been one kind of perfection, but the preamble, but talking about the need to create a more perfect union, clearly indicates that there are greater perfections to be had by the United States. Progressive document, there's no way to get around it. These people are just nuts. They're just deeply confused. I could say other things about them, but deeply confused is about one of the kindest ways that I can describe it. So this is the way it's a progressive government. Other rights that may not be apparent in 1775 may be very apparent in 2024, just like the things I described. You know, 2 examples: suffrage, for example, women's suffrage, slavery, you know, other things. Deeply obvious. There's no question about that. And this was the way it was meant to be. The Ninth Amendment mandates it, and the idea that the only rights that exist in the Constitution, which an originalist or a textualist would say, are the ones that are specifically stated in the Constitution, is a constitutional and judicial heresy. Those people are heretics. And those are the people that you have in the Supreme Court right now. And not only the Supreme Court, but, you know, thanks to the great extent of Moscow Mitch McConnell, you also have them in the lower areas of the federal court because, of course, you know, all those appointments have to be approved of by the Senate. That's, you know, advice and consent. That's what the Senate does. The court it fills the courts with these kinds of people, and that's okay. That's supposed to happen. That's constitutional. There's no problem with that. Senate gets to approve judges. The Roman Senate was like that too. The Roman Senate approved all sorts of things. So this is no problem. But they're filled with all those kinds of people, and you have the ad hoc society, which is even worse, which is the Federalist Society, which is not a government society. It's a private society. It's the executive vice president is Leonard Leo. Leonard Leo's the executive vice president of the Federalist Society, and he belongs to a totally medieval organization. We're going back to the 1200s again, maybe the 1100s. Knights of Malta. And these organizations I've described in other shows. They're inimical to secular government. They don't like secular government. They would very much like to see secular government destroyed and a more or less of a theocracy and medieval type situation be restored. So, you know, I'm just quoting a little bit of Dobbs v. Jackson to you. It's a long case. I'm not going to do the whole case, but this is Judge Alito. This is what he is. And there's just no getting around it. There's no sugarcoating it. It needs to be stated for what it is. And I know that people have the idea that just because a judge is a guy, I just totally understand this, is a guy who's wearing a black robe, he sits up on a bench, and he's holding a gavel, he must know what he's doing. But I assure you that is not the case, and that these people are eminently flawed, and that they are eminently affected by things that ought not to affect their individual jurisprudence and views upon something so crucial as the rights we have under the Constitution. And yet we have Justice Alito. And so I'm getting back to the thing that I was talking about. All right, I intended to talk about, we have this article from the New York Times, and believe me, this was big. This was reported everywhere. That Alito, that an upside-down flag, an inverted flag, if you will, was flying outside Alito's home. And it's true. It's definitely true. An upside-down American flag means that the nation is in distress, or say if it was like a ship and it was flying an upside-down flag, that would definitely be an indication that the ship itself was in distress. Although it has the implication, it still has the implication that the nation is in distress. And the problem with this, among other things, is that this was a prominent symbol of January 6 coup plotters and insurrectionists who tried to overthrow the government on January 6. And you know, this is a real problem because you have the Supreme Court in the coming weeks. They had the arguments, the oral arguments on it, like I think it was April 25th. They're going to be ruling on 2 cases involving the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, including whether President Trump has immunity for his actions. And to know that you have a justice who has an opinion about this and who further says, oh, I didn't do it, because he denies it. He says, oh, I had nothing to do with it. It was my wife. But, you know, you can't tell me that he didn't know that the flag was upside down. You can't tell me that he walked in and out of his house multiple times on the way to work, to and from work, and didn't see this, didn't know this. This is ridiculous. It's a clear violation of every ethical canon that any other judge would know about. He's compromised. He has an opinion in the case. and he should do something called recusal. And recusal means that he should voluntarily withdraw from the case because there's the appearance of prejudice. But I assure you, he's not going to do that. Thomas is not going to do that. Barrett is not going to do that. We've talked about those two. We haven't talked that much about Thomas. We'll talk about him. But they are not going to recuse themselves. There's this grand arrogance that exists in them. But I assure you, he's not going to do that. I say this again, assure you the kinds of justices that we have on the court. That's the intent here. And how dangerous this is, these reactionary and fascist judgments. He's basically an election denier. This is someone who winks, and we'll see in the coming decisions just basically exactly how that spreads into fascism. But at this point, it looks very dangerous from the standpoint of Alito being one of those. And I know that Thomas is another. I know that Barrett is yet another. They're basically winking at the violence. And to do that's fascism. When Senator Hawley comes out on January 6th, and he comes out and he gives the raised fist salute to the violent demonstrators, the ones who were breaking into the Capitol, that's supporting fascism. If you're an election denier, you're supporting fascism because that was a violent attempt to break into the Capitol, kill the legislators, kill Vice President Pence, kill Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and sorry guys, that's fascism. If you support that, that's fascism. If you fly the flag upside down, which is a symbol of the coup plotters and the insurrectionists, that's fascism. Sorry, that's what it is. These are reactionaries at the very least, and there's fascism. And let me tell you another thing while we're at it. There should be no fairness for fascism. You have people talk about both sidesism. There's no both sidesism here. There's nothing like that. When there's a political doctrine that has proven to destroy countries, which is intent upon destroying countries, that has presided over great murders, great mayhems, great depredations, there's no fairness for that. And fascism is one of those. And I say here at Politics by Jake, our doctrine is no fairness for fascism. You cannot play this game with a political doctrine of fascism that has so many negative effects as it does. You can't use the Marquis de Queensberry rules. There's no ethics to this because it's either them or you. And we have dwindling chances to save our democracy. They are dwindling. We don't have many of them left. And as a consequence, this is one of the very important reasons for Politics by Jake. Talked to you about that before. And it's important to bring these things to my listeners' attention. That's why I am doing that. So there's that. And now let's pause for a brief commercial message. Hi, this is Jake, and I'm back again to talk to all of you who are business owners. You want asset protection, right? And why? Because you wanted the wealth that you were growing in the business to be protected in the best way possible, and you wanted to keep your personal wealth out of it. But did you know that just creating a corporation or a limited liability company does not guarantee that at all? If you're like me, that makes you feel pretty angry. Do you want to know if there's any way to protect your business and your personal wealth? Well, go to www.jakelaw.me or call me directly now at 573-454-1168, and let's talk about that. Call now. Save your assets now. And now we're back. And now let's take time for a message from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. As a business owner, do you want to avoid growing pains from your business, minimize client confusion, missed opportunities, bad business dealings, and lawsuits? Well, that is what Get in Writing is designed to do. This program, a package of 27 great business forms, is designed to keep you out of trouble, streamline your business, and make you more profitable. If you were to go out and buy these forms individually, you could wind up spending more than $25,000. $25,000! But if you take advantage of this opportunity, you will spend far, far less than $1,000. Go to my website now, www.jakelaw.me, or call me now at 573-454-1169. Call now. Save now. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. So that's the end of our edition for today, and we hope you have a good week. We just want to remind you, although I'm sure you know, that on Monday, May 27th, is Memorial Day, and of course that's a great time for people to not only honor our war dead, which is the main purpose for it, but also to have barbecues, meet with family, be out in the sun, have an extra day off because it's a 3-day holiday, watch baseball, shop, do all the things that we can do because we live in this great country. So have a great week, and I will see you Friday, the 24th.